Title: The Chilling Story of Darlene Gentry, the Texas nurse who tried to bury the truth. True crime documentary, The Call That Shattered Robinson. It was the kind of quiet morning that small-town Texas was built on. November 9, 2005, a calm, cool sunrise in Robinson just south of Waco. The Gentry's neighborhood was still wrapped in that early morning stillness when the piercing tone of a 911 call broke it apart. At 6:11 a.m., a woman's trembling voice filled the line. "Please, my husband, he's hurt. There's blood everywhere." The caller was 31-year-old Darlene Gentry, a nurse, a mother of 3, and, by all accounts, the picture of stability. Her words were frantic, but her tone carried something else too, something controlled, almost rehearsed. When emergency responders arrived, they found a home that looked perfectly ordinary. A tidy suburban house, children's toys scattered near the front lawn, and holiday decorations still packed in boxes near the porch. But inside the master bedroom, the scene told a darker story. Keith Gentry lay motionless in bed, blood pooling across the sheets. He was still breathing, shallow, labored gasps marked by the faint bubbling of pink foam at his mouth, but his pulse was fading fast. Darlene stood nearby, clutching a phone, her face pale. She told paramedics she'd woken up minutes earlier to find the back door open and her husband unresponsive. Some of Keith's guns, she said, were missing, stolen. While medical personnel rushed Keith to Hillcrest Baptist Medical Center in Waco, police began examining the house. The supposed break-in looked strange. There were no broken locks, no signs of forced entry, and no ransacked rooms. In fact, several of the missing firearms had been neatly stacked just outside the back door, as if someone had placed them there deliberately. Detectives exchanged glances. It didn't look like a burglary. It looked like a scene meant to look like one. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors fought to keep Keith alive. The 31-year-old engineering assistant had sustained a gunshot wound to the head. Despite their efforts, the damage was catastrophic. 2 days later, on November 11th, Keith Gentry was pronounced dead. The shock rippled through Robinson. Keith wasn't just another name in the paper. He was a son, a husband, and a father to 3 little boys: Chase, Cody, and baby Cade. The Gentrys were the kind of family everyone knew: polite, church-going, hardworking. Keith's parents lived right next door, often helping watch the kids. To them, Keith and Darlene were an ideal couple, young, in love, and devoted to family. But as investigators started asking questions, that image began to crack. Darlene told police that she and Keith had argued the night before, a fight about money. She'd gone out for dinner with friends, and Keith, already frustrated about finances, found the receipt when she returned home. They argued, she said, and she left to cool off before coming back later that night. Keith went to bed alone. She slept in the other room with their children, claiming the youngest had been restless. Her account was simple, almost too simple. She said she woke up around 6 a.m., discovered the back door open, and found Keith shot. But when forensic experts examined the scene, they concluded the shooting had likely occurred hours earlier, long before Darlene claimed to have found him. That wasn't the only red flag. As a trained nurse, Darlene knew how to check for breathing, how to perform CPR, how to call out for help, but she hadn't done any of that. She didn't touch Keith, didn't attempt first aid, didn't even lead paramedics to him when they arrived. Her 911 call, too, drew scrutiny. The operator noted how strangely composed she sounded, calm, methodical, explaining her movements in great detail. It didn't feel like panic. It felt like performance. Then came the interview. At first, Darlene answered questions freely, repeating her version of events. But as investigators began pressing her, asking about the missing guns, the open door, and the timeline, she froze. Moments later, she invoked her Fifth Amendment right to remain silent and requested a lawyer. To the detectives, it was confirmation that something wasn't right. For the next 2 weeks, the small town buzzed with rumor and disbelief. How could Darlene, a bright, kind mother loved by her in-laws, possibly have anything to do with Keith's death? Even Keith's parents refused to consider it. They defended her fiercely, caring for her and the children as she grieved. But the investigation didn't stop. When police returned to the Gentry home with a search warrant, they dug deeper, and this time they found something. Inside the kitchen trash bin, wrapped in paper towels, were a pair of latex gloves. Inside one glove, a single .22 caliber shell casing. The same caliber as the bullet that killed Keith. Tests revealed traces of gunshot residue, and DNA from both Keith and Darlene. To detectives, it was a turning point. The staged break-in, the lack of forced entry, the gloves in the trash, all of it pointed in one direction. And when investigators uncovered another piece of the puzzle, Keith's life insurance policy, valued at over $500,000, motive began to take shape. 19 days after Keith's death, on November 28, 2005, police arrested Darlene Gentry for murder. Her in-laws, still convinced of her innocence, posted her $50,000 bond. She walked out of jail, free for now, but the case was far from over. Because while Darlene was out on bond, she would make one fateful move that would erase all doubt about what really happened that night, and lead detectives straight to the truth buried beneath the surface. The pond. After her release on bond, Darlene Gentry seemed determined to move forward, at least on the surface. To friends and family she appeared calm, even optimistic. She smiled when talking about her boys, attended church, and kept her tone composed when reporters asked questions. She spoke softly about Keith, describing him as a good man, and insisting she'd never hurt him. Behind closed doors, though, the investigation had only intensified. Detectives from McLennan County believed the scene inside the Gentry home had been staged, a carefully arranged tableau meant to suggest a robbery gone wrong. But if Darlene truly was the one who pulled the trigger, where was the weapon? That question hung over the case like a storm cloud. The answer came from a strange source, a local landowner named Robert Pavavila. Pavavila had known Darlene casually. He owned property near Axtell, a quiet stretch of rural land surrounded by fields and ponds. Not long after her release, Darlene reached out to him. She said she wanted to buy a small plot, a piece of land with a pond. When he asked why, she told him it reminded her of Keith, how he'd always dreamed of taking their sons fishing one day. It sounded sentimental, almost poetic. Pavavila found her reasoning touching. But just weeks later she called him again, this time with a bizarre request. She wanted the pond filled in. The sudden reversal puzzled him. Why spend money on a property you plan to alter so drastically? When he pressed for a reason, she said it simply brought back too many memories. But something in her tone felt off, too deliberate, too rehearsed. Pavavila couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After talking it over with his wife, he decided to contact the authorities. Detectives immediately perked up. A pond? Owned by someone Darlene had recently contacted? And now she wanted it filled? They didn't believe in coincidences. Within days, investigators organized a search of the property. The day they arrived, the pond looked peaceful, still water reflecting a dull winter sky. But what lay beneath was anything but serene. As divers entered the murky water, visibility dropped to nothing. They moved slowly, methodically sweeping the pond bed. Then one of them felt something solid buried in the silt. When it was brought to the surface, the truth glistened in the sunlight, a .22 caliber revolver. The very caliber that had taken Keith Gentry's life. When the results came back from the lab, there was no doubt. The bullet that killed Keith had been fired from that gun. It was the murder weapon, hidden in plain sight, resting beneath a pond Darlene had tried to bury. For investigators, it was a breakthrough, but they needed more. They wanted to prove Darlene knew the gun was there. So they set a trap. They went back to Pavavila and asked if he'd be willing to help. Nervously he agreed. Following their instructions, he called Darlene again and told her he planned to fill the pond soon. But first he said he'd have to drain it. The reaction they were hoping for came almost immediately. Darlene didn't object, didn't panic. She simply said, "All right," and thanked him. But the next morning, under the gray Texas sky, she drove out to the property. Hidden cameras had been placed around the pond, recording her every move. Wearing wading boots and carrying a long rod, Darlene stepped into the cold water. Her movements were careful, deliberate. She began probing the pond bed, right at the spot where the revolver had already been found. For several minutes she searched. The camera caught everything, the splashes, the tension, her steady focus on that one area. She didn't seem like a grieving widow reminiscing about her husband's favorite place. She looked like someone trying to recover evidence. When she left, investigators knew they finally had her. 2 weeks later, police confronted Darlene with the footage. She said nothing at first, only stared as the video played, her own image, knee-deep in the water, poking at the mud where the gun had been. When asked why she was there, she claimed she'd gone to think, to find peace. But no one believed it. In February 2007, more than a year after Keith's death, Darlene Gentry was arrested again, this time for good. Her trial took place in Waco, inside a packed courtroom filled with reporters, family members, and spectators from Robinson. The prosecution's case was simple but devastating. Darlene had murdered her husband for money. When financial troubles grew unbearable and their marriage strained, she saw Keith's $500,000 life insurance policy as a way out. They played the surveillance footage in court. Jurors watched in silence as Darlene appeared on screen, her figure reflected in the pond's still water. It was the image that broke her defense. The gloves found in her trash, the staged burglary, the missing guns, everything now fit together. Even her request to fill in the pond became a confession without words. Her defense team called no witnesses during the guilt phase. There was nothing left to say. On February 8, 2007, after 5 days of testimony, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Darlene Gentry was sentenced to 60 years in prison. She was taken from the courtroom without emotion. No tears, no pleas, no words of regret. But the story didn't end there. Because while justice had been served in the eyes of the law, the damage left behind, the children, the families, the haunting memory of that November morning, would linger for decades. Aftermath, the lives left behind. When the courtroom emptied on that cold February afternoon in 2007, the world didn't seem to move the same for those who had lived through the Gentry tragedy. The cameras, the reporters, the whispers, all faded. What remained was a silence heavy enough to crush a family. Keith's parents, Bob and Linda Gentry, sat together in the wooden benches as the verdict echoed through the room. Guilty. One word. It should have brought relief. It should have felt like justice. But instead it landed like a stone in the chest. Because the woman who had just been sentenced to 60 years in prison wasn't just a killer, she was their daughter-in-law, the mother of their grandchildren, the woman they had welcomed into their family with open arms. For a long time after Keith's death, Bob and Linda had stood firmly by Darlene's side. They defended her against rumors, spoken up for her on the news, even posted her bond after her first arrest. They believed her when she said she was innocent. When the truth came out, that belief shattered something deep inside them. "We lost 2 people," Linda would later tell a local paper. "Our son, and the woman he loved." They were left with 3 little boys, Chase, Cody, and Cade. The oldest had just started school when his father was killed. The youngest was still in diapers. None of them could understand why their mother wasn't coming home. For years, the boys were raised by their grandparents, shielded from the full truth for as long as possible. But as they grew older, the questions came. Why isn't Mom here? Did she do it? Did she really hurt Dad? There are some questions no grandparent should ever have to answer. Bob and Linda made a choice, one rooted not in anger but in love. They decided that the boys deserved to remember both their parents, not just one. They told them stories about Keith's kindness, his sense of humor, his devotion to his family. And about their mother they said only this, that she had made mistakes, terrible, irreversible mistakes, but that she had once loved them deeply. In interviews years later, Linda admitted that forgiveness was hard. "It doesn't come easy," she said quietly. "But you have to let go of hate or it eats you." Darlene, meanwhile, was transferred to the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas, a women's prison known for housing some of the state's most infamous inmates. She would be eligible for parole in 2037, at the age of 63. Inside she kept mostly to herself. Former inmates would later describe her as quiet, polite, and deeply private. She rarely spoke about her case, and when she did, she still maintained that Keith's death had been an accident, that she hadn't meant to kill him. The investigators who built the case against her didn't buy that for a second. They believed the shooting had been cold and calculated, the act of a woman cornered by debt and desperation. But to some who had known her before it all, the truth felt more complicated. Darlene had once been the girl next door, a bright nursing student who fell in love young and built a life fast. She and Keith had 3 kids before they turned 30. They worked long hours, paid bills, raised babies, and did what most couples do. They survived on hope. But somewhere along the way, that hope cracked under the weight of pressure, pride, and money troubles. In the end, Keith's life ended not in a moment of madness, but in a decision. One that left a trail of destruction no one could ever repair. By the time the dust settled, Robinson, that small Texas town where everyone knew everyone, had changed too. People locked their doors at night now. They spoke in hushed tones when passing the Gentry house. The story became part of local lore, a grim reminder that evil can wear a familiar face. Every November, Keith's parents still visit his grave. They bring flowers, sometimes a fishing lure or a toy truck from one of the boys. The headstone bears a simple inscription: "Beloved husband, father, and son. Gone too soon." As for the boys, they grew up mostly away from the spotlight. By the time they became teenagers, they had chosen to stop talking publicly about the case altogether. But those who knew the family say the Gentry brothers carried their father's gentle manner, his quiet smile, his kindness, his steadiness. They also carried the weight of both legacies, a father who was taken and a mother who could never come home. For the people of Robinson, the Gentry case was more than a crime story. It was a tragedy that peeled back the layers of an ordinary marriage and revealed the quiet darkness that can grow in the corners of love, when pride, money, and pressure twist something once pure into something fatal. And so, nearly 2 decades later, the pond in Axtell still sits under the Texas sun, calm, reflective, unremarkable to anyone passing by. But beneath its surface lies the memory of everything that was lost. A life, a marriage, and the illusion of safety in a small town that thought it knew its own.